Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our 8th Web Talk of 2021. I am Lydia Missalidis, the Executive Director for the Alliance for Leadership in Education and your host and moderator for these Web Talks. I am excited to report there are almost 500 people joining us today on this webinar. Thank you all for attending. I think that illustrates the level of interest in our subject matter today. As always, the webinar is being recorded and will be available for download from the CADS website probably by tomorrow morning. You should have received an email from Pam at CADS this morning that contains the PowerPoint and 3 handouts. And you can also download those handouts and the PowerPoint from the control panel to the right of your screen under the tab labeled Handouts. Our format, as always, is listen only, but we do encourage you to submit questions and comments in the question box, again, in the control panel to the right of your screen. We have a lot of content to get through today, so I cannot promise that we're going to have time to do live Q&A, but I do want to assure you that between the Department of Aging, producing frequently asked questions documents, and the Vision team helping to produce these web talks for the next few months, we'll be continuing to educate you and provide you with technical assistance and guidance that you need. These now twice monthly web talks are made possible for the Adult Day Services community at no charge through a grant from the California Archstone Foundation. Today will mark the first of a series of trainings, as I mentioned, to help guide you back to center-based services over the course of the next half year or so. Last time we gave you a sneak peek at what is going to happen, and today our goal is to provide you with a comprehensive preview of the soon-to-be-released all-center letter from the Department of Aging and the Vision team's ideas about how you can move forward. It's going to take a number of these trainings and discussions for things to come into sharper focus for you. You will not get all the answers you seek today, in part because while we know many of the questions that you have and we continue to have, we do not yet have all the answers. I promise you they will come over time. As we did in the spring lockdown, we are all committed to support you and guide you along this path. The process of recongregating, I promise you also, is going to be messy. It is not going to it will feel different from the spring lockdown, and honestly, I think it's going to be a little bit harder and it's going to take a little bit more energy. But just as during the spring lockdown, we all got through it together. We so value our partnership with the California Department of Aging CBAS team, who have really helped lead the way here and assure us that things are all going to turn out well in the end. And you know, we continue to remind ourselves we're still in recovery mode from a major emergency, and it takes time and a lot of energy to recover. And I can say we do have a clear goal now, and we are all going to get there together just as we did in the spring. The good news is we can see a hopeful future as California stays ahead of the virus. We'll hear more about that in a little bit. So in the interest of time, I just want to note on this slide that last time's web talk was scored a 4.6. As I mentioned, that was a little preview. I hope you take the time to read these comments. It's just a sampling, but we do read every single one, and we so appreciate your input and commentary on what we can do for you. And here's our agenda for today. As I mentioned, we'll, as usual, start out with a quick update on vaccine and vaccinations, preview of the CDA all-center letter. That'll be about 30 minutes, preparing for safe reentry to CBAS Congregate services with our Vision team, and then we'll end as usual with our resources and thought
Lydia,
for the week. Yes?
I'm sorry to interrupt, your slides are not advancing.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, let me see why that might be. I've got the attendee view there.
If you want to keep going, I'll pull them up on my end in a minute, and then I'll switch myself to presenter and start sharing them for you.
Okay, that would be helpful. I don't know why that is. Okay, I will keep going. So as I said, you can take a look at the evaluation comments as you download the PowerPoint and have a chance to review it. You may have also heard the governor say yesterday that the state's tier system, the blueprint for reopening the tier system, is going to be taken down on June 15th in light of the great progress the state's making with vaccination rates and the quickly dropping case rates and hospitalizations. The mask mandate remains in place, however, and Jill and Denise will talk a little bit more about this. Richard's going to kick things off as he has the last few webinars with a quick overview of vaccines and vaccinations. As I mentioned, there's a lot of good news there, and a huge thank you to all of you who are here today who supported the effort to get vaccinations to your staff, participants, and caregivers. The work is truly paying off. After Richard, we're going to hear from Jill Sparrow and Denise Peach for about 30 minutes to give you a preview of the upcoming guidance from CDA. Then the Vision team members will share their thinking about how to plan for an orderly, safe transition back to center-based services, and then we'll take a few polls along the way to hear from you. And as I mentioned, we have 3 tools to share with you that you should download. One is about transportation, one's a sample form for prioritizing participants based on urgent needs that Lois will talk about, and the third is a Cal OSHA guidance and template that we reviewed last time, and it is mandatory, so I want to make sure that all of you have that. Next slide. Thank you, Pam. So here's our presenter team today. We've covered them. The presenters from the Vision team really do cover a wide variety and cross-section of our adult day healthcare providers. And while today's subject matter is geared toward adult day healthcare CBAS, we do believe the adult day programs who are listening will also benefit from a lot that we're going to be discussing. And when guidance for adult day programs is released, we'll certainly share that with you. We'd hoped that it would have happened by now, but there's been some kind of a delay. So there's a lot of ground to cover. Let's get right to it with Richard leading off the discussion on vaccinations. Richard, welcome.
Thanks, Lydia. Good morning, everybody. My name is Richard again from Beverly Adult Day Healthcare. I'm the program director. I'm just going to provide a few of the vaccine or the vaccination updates. I think it will be review for a lot of people because as we took the poll last time, I think over 2/3 of everybody has vaccinated the majority of the participants and staff, but it's good to know and also good resources to have moving forward for the people that have not been vaccinated or have not been able to become vaccinated. With this current slide, it's kind of evidence of what's been moving forward within the different facilities. This is from Well and Fit, Ellen's facility, who did a drive-through vaccination clinic. And so I think with the partnerships of pharmacies and different organizations, it's been possible to mass vaccinate a lot of participants recently, something that was not possible or very difficult to do in the previous kind of months because of supply issues. But this is one of the ways that I think centers are moving forward in providing vaccinations, not just for their participants, but their staffs and also community facilities. Next slide, please. Just to go over a brief rundown of everything that's been happening, it's constantly changing, and I know that everybody's having a difficult time staying on top of things, and the My Turn website is still a little bit of a burden to get through, especially for those that aren't as computer literate. But I think the supply issue has solved a lot of the big problems that we were experiencing again in the past few months. So with the start of April on the 1st, within California, everybody over the age of 50 years has been eligible for the vaccine. That includes those with disabilities and without disabilities. So it pretty much covers, at least for our center, the majority of our participants. So it's been very helpful, and that's evidenced by any kind of ID or birthday verification. You don't necessarily need evidence of disability or self-attestation if you're over 50 years. For those that are under 50 years of age, you still need that attestation. The second point, that all adults are eligible as of 4/15. So on April 15, everybody over the age of 16 will be eligible for vaccination in California. We say adults because it's usually 18 and over that we think of, but those that are between the ages of 16 and 18 can still receive the Pfizer vaccine, which has been approved for those that are under 18. And a lot of the follow-up questions that we get are usually, what about the people under 16? And I think the trials are still going on with very positive results. But at this current time, starting on 4/15, everybody over the age of 16 will be eligible to make appointments or to get vaccinated. You can actually go online if there are appointments available past 4/15. Even if you're not currently eligible, you can still make appointments for those future dates because you will be eligible on the dates that occur after 4/15. We know that vaccine supply is increasing, which is really making it a lot easier for those that are trying to become vaccinated who are eligible. I think recently with Los Angeles and Orange County and also the Central Valley and Northern California all together, it's been a lot easier to find even same-day appointments for vaccinations. Going through the different vaccines that are available, Pfizer, Moderna, and the J&J Janssen vaccine, each individual site has availability depending on how they're using the vaccines. The vaccine site that I was volunteering at was reserving the J&J vaccine for those that were immobile or had a hard time to follow up with appointments. And maybe Pfizer would be reserved for those between the age of 16 and 18. But again, it's really good to check with the individual site before you make a visit to make sure that you can verify which vaccine is being used. And we're seeing that more with the addition of new vaccines and kind of 3 being available, that even participants have sort of leanings in terms of which vaccine they want or don't want. And those we've had difficulty kind of convincing to get a vaccine. Once we kind of broach the topic of a one-shot J&J vaccine, we've had more success with doing that. So I think that's another topic to explore. With the accessibility, it's been a lot better because we have seen more drive-through lanes and kind of accommodations for those that aren't able to just walk up to the vaccine sites. So drive-throughs and also vaccine walk-up sites are still available. So it's also good to check those on the websites individually. And we know that specifically with Los Angeles, the sheriff department has gone and started vaccinating homebound individuals that aren't able to leave their homes to become vaccinated. And so I would suggest you check with your local organizations or local kind of fire departments to see if that's an option that's available in your locality. But we know that these outreaches are really happening at a fast pace. So just keeping your ears open for something that might be open for people that are homebound is a very important thing. And that will be kind of the last mile people that we have to reach in the future for those that we can't have just regularly go to an appointment slot. And that just covers the kind of roundabout and kind of whole gamut of things that are available for us currently. Next slide, please. I think with the My Turn website, this last slide, it's kind of a review of last time, and that's when we were designated that CVAS participants were all eligible to get their vaccinations, and it was that we were recommending that you click yes on the second filter question of, do you currently have a physical or mental disability? And so right now this would apply to those that are under the age of 50 that attend CVAS or adult day programs or any kind of waiver programs available to them. You would click yes on the second topic, and that would make you eligible for vaccination appointments via My Turn. Again, a lot of these problems were solved because California opened up eligibility to 50 and over on April 1st, and moving forward from April 15th, everybody should be eligible. So we don't have to pay too much attention to these filter questions, but they're still applicable in specific circumstances right now. Next slide, please. Also with the additional appointment sites, these were also a little bit more relevant in the past when supply was a big issue and we had to constantly find ourselves refreshing and looking at different websites. But aside from the My Turn website available, there's also different pharmacy retail websites that we can visit to make sure that we're, finding all the resources that are available in terms of receiving appointments if there are none through My Turn. And so CVS, Rite Aid, even Kaiser Hospital Group, they have their own website to do signups as well. And I know the managed care programs in the area have also started doing outreach in terms of providing links and kind of sites to be able to do that. And online tools are always available. Find My VaxLA is a really good local one that we use that kind of has real-time supply. And again, this is not too much of an issue because now if you go on My Turn, you can 99% of the time find a reasonable accommodation for an appointment at the current time. And the sites have usually, for those that are kind of retail websites and not through My Turn, they usually have less traffic, so it's a little bit easier to navigate for the individual. Next slide, please. And this goes back to kind of what the first topic that we talked about, and it's partnering with retail pharmacies to provide that kind of drive-through clinic, on-site clinic that centers might be thinking about doing for those that have a large group of people that haven't been vaccinated. And so reaching out to your local pharmacies and pharmacists may be a really good resource. And we've had many success stories recently for people that have really set up something on-site really quick, especially with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. It's just one shot, and so you can get to a really high number of people that are vaccinated in a very short period of time without having to do the manual work that we previously had been doing with scheduling vaccinations. And with the last slide, this is another example. It's New Sunrise, and it's Lena's group in Northridge, and they did an on-site as well. This wasn't a drive-through, so you can see it a little bit more logistically challenging because there is spacing and everything going on. But again, this is just more evidence of, the retail pharmacy partnerships that are happening and the vaccination clinics that are not just happening within the existing community clinics, but are being set up through individual providers. And so that's the end of my section, and we'll bring it back to Lydia to do some polls.
Okay. So let me get to my poll. And we're going to ask you the same question that we asked at the last webinar. I'll go ahead and launch this now. I hope you can see it. Yes. Oh. There we go. So what percent of your participants do you estimate are vaccinated as of today? In other words, they've gotten at least one dose if they have a 2-dose regimen. So let's get your best estimate. And then at the next web talk, we'll compare the last 2 responses and see where we are. Again, this is just an estimate. Since we have so many of you today. All right, I think I'm going to close this in the interest of time. And here's our results. So you can see looking good. You guys have made tremendous progress. Thank you for that. And I've got one more poll related to vaccines, and this has to do with staff. So what percent of your staff do you estimate are vaccinated as of today? I'll give that just a minute or 2 here. Really great progress here as well, everybody. Okay, I'm going to close this in 3, 2, 1, and share the results. Very impressive. 16% of you have 100% of your staff teams vaccinated, 55% between 3/4 and 100%, and only 7% of you are less than 25%. Congratulations, everybody. All right, next slide. So from here, we're going to turn it over to Jill and Denise, who need no introduction, with the CBAS branch of the Department of Aging. So Jill, Denise, welcome.
Hi, thanks, Lydia. Good morning, everybody. It's nice to join you all again. We're happy to be able to kind of, I guess, provide you with a ACL preview or trailer, as I think I like to call it here today, a trailer to our to what's coming up with the release of ACL 2104. So we'll dive right in and get started. So today we're just going to briefly kind of give you an overview of what's been happening with the Vision Team activities since the beginning of the year. Talk a little bit about that, and then dive into the content, or some of the kind of an overview of the content of ACL 2104. Talk a little bit about the transition that is outlined in the ACL, and what that will mean for providers and for participants. And then we'll walk through some of the provider planning and preparedness requirements that we have outlined in our CBAS Congregate Services Checklist, CDA 7027. This is a new form coming your way with the release of this ACL. So we'll talk some about that. And I think just today, this discussion is pretty timely, given with the governor's announcement yesterday about California's plan to fully open its economy on June 15th, if certain criteria are met. So I know the plans are underway. So definitely the release of ACL 2104 will be particularly timely, and I think will align nicely with where the state is headed. So we'll talk some more about that. Okay, next slide. So it's beginning of the year, and I know we've talked about this in previous webinars, but the Vision Team has been meeting regularly. And again, the Vision Team is comprised of CDA staff, CADS, leadership, ALE, and many of your colleagues, CBAS providers, who that's kind of the group of people who make up this Vision Team. And the Vision Teams has really been charged with developing a roadmap for ADHC, this ADHC CBAS program in 2021 and beyond. And we have two really primary areas of focus. The first, which we've really been focused on in these last several weeks, is the safe and incremental transition of the program back to congregate center services. Again, and doing that while maintaining flexibility during the continuing public health emergency. The second piece of that is focus of the Vision Team is taking what we've learned over this past year, our experiences and lessons during this public health emergency, and taking those and adapting ADHC CBAS services going forward, and taking a look at how those can support the vision and the principles that are put forth and adopted in the California's Master Plan for Aging. And so, just real quickly too, just a word about the California's Master Plan for Aging, because CBAS is mentioned there. The Master Plan for Aging has 5 important goals and numerous initiatives that address those goals for 2021-22. And like I said, CBAS is specifically mentioned there in goal 2, which is Health Reimagined. Okay? And it states that we will have access to the care and services we need to optimize our health and quality of life, and to continue to live where we choose. So with person-centered care, closing the equity gap, and improving outcomes as focus areas, Initiative 42 specifies to assess need and opportunities to modernize regulatory and licensing barriers for CBAS and SP. So that is really our focus, the focus of the Vision Team. So we'll continue to work towards how we can fulfill that and put forth a vision for future CBAS that incorporates, again, those lessons learned and practices that we've put into place even over the last year. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so first, just kind of set the stage for where we are right now. Right, when back just, it's hard to believe it was just a month ago, but time goes so quickly. In March, we released ACL 2102, response to a lot of questions that we were receiving from providers about in-center services and kind of what the status of that is. So we released ACL 2102 as a reminder that at that time, the requirements that were set forth in ACL 2014, and that had to do with requirements for the provision of in-center services during tasks. It was a reminder that ACL 2014 provisions are still in effect, and at that time in March, we indicated that we would be releasing future guidance that would address in-center services. And so right now where we're at under that guidance is that individual services are permitted only as individual. There are no congregate services, no group services allowed at this time. But again, we indicated that this would be changing with the release of ACL 2104. So that is so that ACL guidance forthcoming in 2104 is what we're going to be previewing today, and anticipate that 2104 will likely be released this week, possibly today, if not tomorrow. So we're working, trying to get that out to all of you very soon. Okay. So first, I wanted to just kind of define our terms, because I think there's often a lot of questions around this. What do we mean? So in prior ACLs, especially way back last year when we released ACL 2006 and in 2014, we specified that in-center services were allowed only for participants as clinically appropriate, essential, and not feasible to perform remotely. And these were individual services only, no congregate or group services allowed. So what we're going to be talking a little bit about today is the transition to new congregate center services, which will come into effect with ACL 2104. And that again is the transitioning of all participants to congregate services by October 31st. We'll be laying out the timelines for that and kind of a roadmap for getting us there. What this means is traditional ADHD CBAS person-centered services delivered individually and or concurrently through group services will be allowed. And again, more information about the kind of the circumstances and criteria for that. But that they will be effective for each provider upon CDA approval. Okay. All right, next slide. So we've keep talking about ACL 2104. So what do we expect to see? So again, today it's just kind of a preview of this, next week we'll be hosting a webinar, just give a lot more details, but I hope to provide you kind of with some of the basic key points today we wanted to highlight. So I guess the point I want just to make sure everyone walks away with again is 2104 is really guidance to outline what this phase transition to congregate service is going to look like and what are the requirements and expectations during this period of time. Right? This phase timeline is that will begin with the release of ACL 2104 and go through October 31st. It also recognized really when the ACL recognizes that we're still in this public health emergency and flexibilities are still needed, and we need to be ready to adapt to circumstances as they change. And so that's the one thing that's constant, right? This past year definitely is that things will change. The ACL also accommodates, we know, varying levels of readiness of providers and participants. Right, we know just by looking at that last poll, many providers may be at different stages of readiness with having perhaps all of their staff vaccinated versus maybe not having any or very few, and the same goes for participants. And levels of readiness apply to, again, facility staff, participants, etc. So the ACL is meant to accommodate that, and the timeline is meant to accommodate that. And ACL also allows for continuing flexibility to make sure, again, very important, that this transition to congregate service is safe, it's orderly, and it happens in a person-centered manner that really meets the needs of participants. So providers may begin the phased transition to congregate services as soon as they complete the required forms, which demonstrating readiness, and CDA and receive CDA approval. And all providers must complete the required forms by June 1st, 2021. So that's an important date just to keep in mind, and we'll come back to that too. And I mentioned the required forms. That's the CDA 7027 that I referred to earlier, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But that also will include their staff services arrangement form, the ADH 006. You have to submit that as needed if there's been staffing changes. Okay. Another point that we'll talk a little bit too is one of the things that's highlighted in the ACL was a change that you can anticipate is that starting with your TAR renewals, starting in July 2021 on a rolling basis for renewals and for new enrollments, IPCs will need to be fully completed by all the MDT members. And those IPCs will need to include plans for the participants' return to congregate center services and any remote services that they may continue to receive during this period of time. Okay. So just a little bit more about the TARs and IPCs and that July 1st date. So again, in order kind of to promote kind of its orderly transition and recognizing that providers are all kind of at different stages of readiness, and making sure that this transition is person-centered and meeting participants' needs. One changes that will occur is starting July 1st for TAR renewals or new TARs for newly enrolling participants. Those will have to be, the IPC will have to be completed in full. That means getting back in boxes 13 and 14. And will need to be completed by your full complement, your full MDT, right? So assessments and reassessments that will be conducted in June for that July renewal will have to be conducted per standard CVAS laws and regs, kind of getting back to our standard requirements in this area. You may have participants again that may be returning to the center prior to their TAR renewing. Let's say maybe their TAR renews in August or September, but that participant may be coming back to the center prior to that. What we outline in the ACL and indicate is that even if their TAR is not renewing in July, it will be renewing on a rolling basis. That individual, that participant, must still be evaluated by the team, by the MDT members necessary to ensure that there is their health record is updated to reflect services that they will be receiving in center. Okay. And again, I stated before that during this transition period, services and what will be reflected in those IPCs will be services that are provided in the center, remotely, or a combination of both. Again, this is all part of the transition. Another key date, again, is that October 31st, 2021. Again, and this is where all participants must be receiving in-center services services in the center at least one time per week by October 31st. Okay. Again, this is the hope we have. We'll provide kind of this period of time to help transition those participants back. Okay. So again, this slide you see in front of you is just really kind of a summary, and I think it's important to kind of just take a look at these again. So April, likely April 7th, 8th, when the ACL 2104 is released, that is the earliest date that you can begin completing activities or complete activities specified in CDA 7027, demonstrating your center's readiness to begin transitioning to congregate services and submit to CDA for approval. So again, that CDA 7027, you'll need to complete and submit that to CDA for approval prior to beginning congregate services, beginning that transition. June 1st is another key date. Again, so keeping in mind June 1st, all providers must have completed the activities that are specified in CDA 7027, demonstrating their readiness to begin that transition to congregate services and submit it to the form to CDA for approval. So we have a period of time between now and June 1st where providers will be working on those activities and tasks in that CDA 7027 and submitting that to CDA. July 1st is that kind of the next date on the calendar where it's really good to be aware of. And this is when, on a rolling basis, TARs and IPCs that are beginning or renewing effective July 1st and beyond shall include both congregate and any continuing need for remote services. So again, effective that day, there are IPCs. We're getting back into boxes 13 and 14. We're getting back to the full MDT assessment or reassessment of participants. And then October 31st, all important date as well. That's when participants that are continuing with CVAS, they shall be receiving services in the center at least 1 day per week by that date. Okay. So I keep mentioning CDA 7027. So I hopefully I've piqued your interest by now. What is this form, right? So this form is a document. It's a planning document for providers. It has on it a list of important resources for you, and it is an attestation that you're going to provide to CDA, attesting to that you've completed the critical tasks list there to ensure the safe delivery of congregate services in your center. And it is required, it's a required step that all providers must complete prior to approval for the delivery of congregate services. So again, and we can't stress enough that providers may not begin providing congregate services until they complete the CDA 7027, submit it to CDA, and receive CDA approval. So just a note on that. Our team is making a priority to review those forms as they're submitted. So our intention is to be able to review and return those to providers within 5 business days. So I want to be as timely as we can on those. Okay. So let's take we'll kind of just walk through generally the CDA 7027 and kind of give you a sense of what that form contains and give you a little overview. Okay, next slide. And I know I'll go through a little bit of overview, but I know your colleagues also will be providing some more information about kind of expanding on some of the information and how-tos, maybe how to consider and address some of the tasks and requirements outlined in this checklist. Okay, so this is just a screenshot of the first page of the CDA 7027. We're going to be retiring that form, that in-center services checklist 7015 that anyone who is providing in-center services had to complete before. So so we are now working with CDA 7027, and there's 4 main sections on this form, and each of these require the provider to do something, whether it's to review and remain in conformance with certain guidelines, requirements, to complete, to establish some protocols, to implement something. There are some tasks kind of embedded in each of these different sections. Next slide. Okay, so this is just a list, kind of outline of the different sections of the CDA 7027. Again, to give you an idea of the different areas and things that you need to be thinking about. And first section is Health Authority Guidelines, Review and Conformance, and this includes information and resources that you need to be familiar with from the CDC, Department of Public Health, and your county public health guidelines, as well as workplace operating conditions, with Cal OSHA, et cetera. And I know that there'll be some more discussion about that later on. Another section is just your physical plant inspection. We talk about provider readiness, and that includes your facility. Do you have, looking at your heating and ventilation, cleaning and maintenance, PPE, and other facility environmental conditions. And infection control then is another area too, again, to consider. Again, what are your planning and preparing for that? Prevention, physical distancing, mitigation, and vaccination, again, of participants and staff. Service planning, again, is another critical area too that we wanted to draw providers' attention to. Plans for re-entry, what are protocols and timelines for that you'll implement, determining how participants are going to be served in the center. Staffing, of course, questions, assessing your staffing needs. There may have likely been changes of this past year. And then transportation, what are your protocols for safe and appropriate transportation for participants. So then those are the 4 main areas on the CDA 7027 that you will have to take a look at, and components that you'll have to consider and address before you submit to CDA for approval. Okay, next slide. This slide then is just a screenshot of the final page of the CDA 7027. And as I indicated earlier, this form is it's an attestation that that a provider has met the requirements above, and that's is ready to begin providing the transitioning to congregate center services. So it'll have a place for your signature, and just note that it also says, the provider, as a provider, you'll need to maintain documentation as appropriate, substantiating that all the requirements that are specified in the form have been met, and they'll be available to CDA and CDPH upon request. So, and again, like I said, CDA will, once we get this form, we will review and approve and send you back a signed copy. So you will have that. And this is a form too we'll also be making available to our managed care plan partners, like we did with previous TAS application documents last year. Okay, next slide. So if you haven't already, and I'm sure for many of these, hopefully these thoughts you've already been considering these, but if you haven't, start thinking about, is your MDT staff available and ready to return to the provision of in-center services, or do you need to hire and train new staff, right? Which of your participants are able and willing to return to congregate center services, and at which frequency, and what might you need to do to prepare them physically for a day of attendance? As we know, many of these our participants may be deconditioned after a year of being at home. So that's something else to consider. And has your center's current enrollment and utilization increased significantly? And if so, what strategies do you have to address this? And we know that, what is your facility, in terms of just being able to provide services to that number of participants in that setting. Do you have sufficient personal protective equipment to implement public health guidance measures based on your participants' vaccination status and the current science about transmission risk? So PPE. And just a side note, PPE is available. We previously put out information that you can order that, and by sending those orders in through CDA. So, and I know many of you are taking advantage of that resource. Another consideration, does your center have the physical space, necessary ventilation, supplies, et cetera, to support the return to congregate center services and be able to follow public health recommendations? So lots to think about, and I know your colleagues definitely will be talking a lot more on this webinar today about all those various considerations and ideas for planning for that return to congregate services. just to summarize, I mentioned this timeline that we've outlined that in ACL 2104. We always say it is subject to change based on the state of the public health emergency and environmental conditions, but all providers must plan on meeting the new requirements that are specified there. Those requirements will lead us back to, again, congregate services, and eventual return to our standard CBAS programming. We're definitely all eager to get going, but again, don't start without CDA approval on this, but that's CDA 7027. We're going to be continuing to meet with the vision team to kind of refine guidance, do training, and support you all during this transition. We know there'll be a lot of questions with the release of ACL 2104, and we hope to be able to answer all your questions in the upcoming days and weeks. And as Lydia said, kind of at the top of the hour, we know that, this perhaps getting back to the congregate services won't be easy, but we know we're going to get there, and I think we're all looking forward to it, definitely. Okay, next slide. Okay, as I mentioned, we will be having we have scheduled a webinar training for next Wednesday, April 14th, from 2 to 3:30 p.m. and we will be sending out an invitation to that shortly. You should be receiving something this week about that. And during that webinar, we'll be covering in more detail, certainly the specific requirements that are outlined in ACL 2104, and we'll have some more time to answer your questions about those requirements. And in addition to that training next week, we'll be, as Lydia mentioned, we'll be producing FAQs as needed. Again, we know there'll be many questions. No? Denise, did you have anything to add? I've raced through that.
As your backup singer here today, really, you covered everything for today, and I look forward to getting into the weeds at the webinar next week, where we'll really get down into all the specifics of the All Center letter and help answer the questions that we know are coming from all of you. And then just a special, just again, a shout out to all of our vision team members who we just could not have gotten here without them. And I really look forward to getting on to our next goal and looking at that master plan on aging effort to look at barriers to improving access to the CDAS program. So anyway, thanks to all those vision team volunteers who come week after week, even though they have other jobs. So I look forward to hearing from them next. So thank you.
Definitely. Thanks.
Thank you, Jill and Denise. Fantastic overview. And we're going to now turn our attention to Ready, Set, Go, our vision team panel. And we're a few minutes behind schedule, but we're hoping maybe we can get to a few questions. I am trying to answer online as many as I'm capable of doing. So at this time, I'd like to turn the stage over to Kay, who will give us a little bit of a context and overview of what's to come, and then we're going to dig into some details with other vision team members. Welcome, Kay.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Lydia. Again, my name is Kay Lee. I'm with Commonwealth Adult Day Healthcare Center in Orange County, and I'll be giving a bit of an overview of some of the considerations that the vision team has been mulling over in preparation to return to congregate services. Next slide, please. So this is just a reiteration of some concepts from last week's 2 weeks ago, our webinar, about how all of the prep work that we'll be going into to return to congregate in-center services are all interconnected. Some of the three main areas that we think are key to really accelerating the timeline so that we can go back to congregate services safely are staff, participants, and facility. So even though these are all separate concepts, you have to make sure that all of your staffing is in place in order to do assessments and maintain a safe environment for our participants. You have to ensure that the facility is safe enough and the facility is ready to bring on participants and staff back, especially if the facility has been somewhat empty this past year. And finally, you have to take into consideration what the needs of the participants are in a person-centered manner, whether there's been a lot of deconditioning because they've been at home for the past year, and even how overwhelming it can be initially when coming back to see people after a time of so much change in the past year due to COVID-19. But in this sense, even though these are all distinct areas, they're all interconnected. Your staffing will ensure that your participants are safe. Your facility, the safety and cleanliness of your facility will ensure that your staff and participants are in an environment where they feel comfortable and safe enough to receive services again in a congregate setting and return to a sense of normalcy after a year that was far from normal. So as you can see on this slide, these are some of the interconnecting factors that really play into each other and reinforce each other as we slowly transition back. Next slide, please. So the concepts that the vision team has focused on is the importance of phasing a reentry to congregate services rather than it happening all at once. I speak for the majority when I say the thinking about coming back to congregate services is a lot more difficult than when we initially went into TAS when the first lockdown happened. Coming back in a phased way and a recovery from what was really a public health disaster emergency. This kind of disaster recovery mentality is, we believe, the safest way to go about coming back into congregate services. And so an incremental and iterative process is to be expected. It won't happen all at once. There might be things that you can learn throughout the process, and just constantly honing in on your processes to ensure that services are provided safely will be key to all of these considerations that we'll be discussing next. So if nothing else, if you haven't started thinking about preparing to return to congregate services, this is really the sign to do so, to get your staff, facility, and participants ready to really hit the ground running and to phase back in one day at a time. Next slide, please. So now I'd like to introduce the rest of the vision team as we'll be discussing some of the facets of preparation that we've been thinking about, and we hope that you all can benefit from as we all go into this next phase together.
Okay, thank you, Kay. So next slide, please. Hi, good morning. My name is Jennifer, and I'm with Neighborhood House Adult Day Healthcare down in San Diego. I'm happy to be with you here this morning. When I was preparing to talk today, I was thinking back about where we were at this time last year in terms of our leadership status. And we were talking about, if you all remember, we were talking about leadership in crisis. And now we are moving forward to what I would call leadership in change. I think a lot of you know the old joke that there's two things that you can count on is death and taxes. Well, I would like to add a third one to that list, and that is change. We've already heard from our CDA partners about all the changes that we're going to be taking a look at and processing in the next coming months. And I think leadership is going to be a really important aspect of successfully meeting those timelines. And so I wanted to share with you one of my favorite quotes from Kuzner and Posner. Kouzes and Posner, excuse me. I really like this quote because it says, leadership is the art of mobilizing others to want to achieve shared aspirations. And that's what I think is so important right now, is we're going to have to do it together. I think that's been a theme this morning, is that we need to work together methodically to incrementally make these changes. Next slide, please. Alrighty, so I would guess that all eyes are going to be on the leadership in your individual centers as we move forward, because they're going to be looking to you as the leader to steer the course as we move through these changes. And I think there's some good bullet points here to kind of consider when you're looking at your leadership and how you want to move your team through these incremental phases that we're going to go through. I think one of the most important ones, and I'm going to choose this one first, is called model the way. As I said, they're going to be looking at you to see how you're feeling about the change. So I think it's really important, even though you might not feel positive and you might feel like you don't have all the answers, you still want to exude that positivity and excitement about moving through these changes, because your staff is going to pick up on that. And I think it's really important to be sensitive to your staff reaction to change. You might think how maybe you were feeling when you were listening to this, our CDA partners talking about these changes we're going to be doing. If you were feeling a little anxiety or a little uncertainty, your staff is going to feel that also. And we just want to normalize those feelings. The good thing is that when we're looking at these changes, we're going to have interim goals. That's why we kind of talked about this being a ready, set goal. And right now we're talking about getting ready. And you can celebrate those successes as you move through each of these different phases. Also, I think it's really important, and I know we talked about this when we were talking about leadership in crisis, is that you want to inspire a shared vision with your team. You want everyone to be excited about the possibilities for the future. And I like how Kay would say this in some of our meetings about getting back to our roots. It's so important. We're so excited to be able to get back and have people in our building and provide services. And we just want to build up that excitement with our team as we move forward. Also, we want to learn from the great work that we've been doing over the last year. So there's a challenge the process. So there's a lot of I think really important lessons we've learned from providing remote services in terms of engaging with our caregivers and our participants. And this is an opportunity now to integrate some of those learned lessons as we move forward into providing center-based services again. Another important aspect is enabling others to act. That's a key role I think you're going to have as a leader, is being able to make each of your staff persons feel capable and powerful, and empowering them to take on tasks to get you ready to go back to center services. So for example, your nurses might be asked to take a look at their medicine cabinets, right? And make sure you don't have expired medicines, or you have your stock medicines in place. Some of your kitchen staff might be looking at food inventory. So there's a lot of different roles that your staff are going to play in this readiness checklist that you're going to create for your center. Also, finally, you want to encourage the heart, and by what that I mean is you want to celebrate your successes as you get ready and you feel like you've met the requirements of being ready. You want to celebrate that with your team. As you get ready to push the go button, you want to all work together and be excited about welcoming participants back into your program in a new way. And I think all of this leads to a very strong team that will get you through these different phases in a very planned and methodical way. And next slide. Oh wait, I think maybe does Richard or Lena or someone want to share some more? I'm not sure what the next slide is going to bring us. Oh yes, next slide please. Yes. So these are some of the roles that people can take on. I just wanted to, in the to be timely, I wanted to give some of my colleagues an opportunity to share some of their thoughts.
Okay, I will defer and just echo everything that Jennifer was saying. It's all really good information, and I think just recovering what we've lost over the past year is the key to the leadership and the morale as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Richard. Lena, did you have anything you want to add?
I just want to emphasize the word team. I can't say enough that this can't be done alone, and you know, utilizing your team, being a good leader, and just everything that you those bullet points was spot on. Encouraging others to take on the tasks, the responsibilities. Definitely, if you're feeling anxious about something, not necessarily suppress your feelings, but you know that you can do it, and that's why you're the leader, and to lead the team in a time of crisis. And one more thing I want to touch on is remind the team and yourself that the things that we will be training on, the things that we will be prepping for will change, and that's okay. As the guidance changes, so will the things that we are putting in place. And sometimes you won't even have time to implement what you've trained on because the guidance has changed, so you have to tweak it a little bit, and that's okay. and it might be a little frustrating, but we can get through it together.
Perfect. I think that leads us to our next slide, actually. Next slide, please. Team readiness. So again, we've just talked a little bit about that. Making sure that your staff rosters are up to date. If you have not been utilizing all of your team, you'll be needing to, in this readiness phase, take a look at bringing on some new staff, or maybe bringing back some staff that have been on furlough, just to make sure that you have the complement of staff that you need to do the assessments that will be coming up. You'll be needing to take a look at your staffing needs. A lot of them might have made other plans when they've been doing remote services, and that's could impact, bringing them back. So now's the time to kind of have those types of discussions with your staff in terms of them getting ready to come back to work in center. Next slide, please. And training, just like Lena said, there's going to be lots and lots of training, and it's going to be a moving target. We might train today on something that is different tomorrow, just as we had heard today that perhaps the tiers are going to be going away in June. There's just a whole host of information, and I think the best place to hear it is here at these web talks, because we're going to try to stay on top of it for you so that you can then give that to your staff in your training sessions, with your staff. So these are just some of the areas that we thought you might want to take a look at as you're getting in your readiness stage in terms of training staff on. Next slide, please. All righty, Miss Lena, I want to pass it off to you.
Thank you. So facility readiness, we touched upon this last week, but it's, again, just as we're going to have ongoing training with our staff, I think that we should be touching these important aspects as well with all of you. So there's no time to prepare better than right now. Start now. Check your facility. If you need to contact third parties to check the ventilation system to make sure that everything is working fine, then do so. If you need to purchase or even get purifiers or anything that you need donated to you, this is the time to do it now. One thing you want to check is your inventory. Do you have enough masks, hand sanitizers? Do you have enough space for when staff comes back? Will they be able to be sitting 6 feet apart from each other? Until guidance has been issued that the distancing no longer needs to be in place, it's something that we need to prepare for now. One thing that I want to say is be proactive, but also flexible. So don't make any permanent changes, because again, guidance is changing. You might not need the 6 feet apart by October. We don't know. So you want to give yourself that flexibility to move things around as the guidance changes and is ready for us. Next slide, please. This is a picture of what our center looked like before COVID. So as you can see, there is anywhere from 8 to, it says 7 to 8 on the slide, but actually 8 to 10, depending on how big our tables were at a table. And the tables were pretty close apart. Pretty close together. And next slide, please. I'll show you what our center looks like now. So we added 2 windows in the back to allow natural light to come in. We distanced the tables where they're 6 feet apart. Unless new guidance comes out, there will actually be 2 people at a table to make sure that the 6 feet distancing is followed. Otherwise, what you see in the picture is for storage purposes, but we made sure that we have that distancing in place. So if you have any remodeling plans, do it now. This is the time to do it. Next slide, please. Just a reminder, I want to point out the Dyson air purifiers. Those are a pretty penny if you buy them new. So if you can get things donated, get them donated. But Ellen, do you want to talk on this slide? I think this is your center, right?
Yes, Lena, thank you. And good morning, everyone. I'm Ellen from Well and Fit Adult Day in Los Angeles. And that's a great tip from Lena. We actually got it on discount, some of it from it was I think Target discount. So anyhow, I'm gonna, like Lydia said earlier, we don't have all the answers, but I'm gonna share just a little bit on what we've been doing with the cleaning and disinfection aspect of the facility preparedness. And we actually have been providing limited one-on-one services since last year after the ACL 2014 was released. And so in order to provide a maximum safe facility environment, and so we did quite extensive research on what are some of the effective and safe cleaning and disinfection measures. And some of the major decisions include the usage of several EPA-approved cleaning and disinfection products. That's shown in the mid picture. And also, we were really fortunate. We had several donation of the Dyson air purifier and from the family members, and we purchased a few more, and just to distribute at different location of the center. And we also added an electrostatic sprayer for the disinfection of a large common area. And I think because of all the safety measures we have in place, and we were fortunate enough, we have a 0 case of COVID infection throughout the pandemic period with the staff or any of the in-center members that we have served during this period of time. And I think for those of you who have not provided in-center service or is planning to resume Congregate service, and it's important to think and plan ahead and on the specific products that you're going to be using. And also, do you have a steady source of supplier and for those products? And it's also very important to read the labels carefully and to use them safely. Follow the product manual. And not all the products are suitable for the electrostatic sprayer, even though it's very effective. It's effective for cleaning of the usually not touched surface area, like the backside of the door handle or the bottom of the chair. And because it's very effective in disinfecting like 360 degree of the direction where you're spraying the different disinfection liquid. And but just be mindful, we're only doing it currently once a day at the end of the business when everyone will be leaving the facility, and for safety precaution as well. And so it's also very, very important to make sure you train your staff properly. And some of the disinfection liquid, whether it's required dilution and what's the percentage, and and I think it's very important for the leadership team to provide that information and training to the staff members. And also, I think it's important to educate your members and the families of the safety precautions you've been taking. And I think it's also give them assurance and peace of mind that the center environment is safe to return. And we actually did a recent survey on the with all our participants, and based on the survey result we collected so far, and over 95% of them feel that our center environment is safe based on the current safety measures we're taking. And more than 75% of them would like to resume the Congregate service as soon as the policy is allowed. And I think definitely, and like Lena and everyone said earlier, it's you need to start planning and preparing right now, even though it's a lot to do. And as a leader, it's also important to really learn to delegate and and let your team be involved in the process as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Next slide, please. This is your center. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about it. I think we're slightly behind schedule, but if you could say a few things.
I'll just do real quick if you can hear me. I'm having a love-hate relationship with my technology here and it threw me out. So hopefully you can hear me and I'm back. The point I just want to make is centers are all different. We come in all shapes and sizes. Some are large, some are small. My center was built back in 1934, so obviously it wasn't built for adult day health care. And so we're trying to make some additions to our facility to make it safe for people to come to our program. So just real quickly, the idea we came up with was having a table there right at the front door as a health screening station that kind of bottlenecks people coming in so that they have to stop at the health station first. So you can see there's a no hand sanitizing machine right there. We have the cups that are for dirty and clean pens. And then we have all of the PPE right there. And then you can just kind of see a view from front and back. So that's just real brief. Next slide, please. And then we just added some plexiglass to our reception area and our nurses area that was a half door. And the only reason I'm mentioning this and showing this is that this is more permanent, but as we move forward, I think it's a good idea to have it there anyways, because COVID is not the only type of airborne infections that we need to think about as we move forward. There's the flu, there's colds, and I think this is a good way to kind of block some of those germs in high contact areas. Next slide, please. Okay.
Thank you, Jennifer and Ellen. So just remember, until further notice, masking, distancing, and ventilation is really important. I'd like to pass it on to Kay to speak about administration.
Thank you, Lena. Next slide, please. So administrative readiness. So this bucket that we'll be discussing next is really about some of the behind the scenes work that the leadership team at your center will be undergoing to prepare everything to bring back your participants successfully. So these are all kind of things that all are required and necessary in order for your program to run smoothly, whether it's reviewing and updating contracts like with your therapists as they come back if they haven't been doing so throughout the past year, reviewing any meal and food contracts, as well as transportation contracts with your transportation providers if those need to be updated in order to reflect the safety protocols that you think are and develop for your participants as they return. Other things are just, in the back of your mind, always considering what your budget allows for. Like Lena said, with the facility portion, it's good to be flexible, but also to make the necessary changes to your facility to ensure that you can reflect all of the safety protocols that you will be developing. And going back to that chart, that triangle chart, even though masking, ventilation, and distancing are all necessary, you have to consider things in the scope of your own center, what is available to you. Some centers don't have access, easily accessible windows to allow for natural ventilation. And in those instances, masking and social distancing can really help make up those limitations. And so it's really not a matter of being perfect, but going as close as you can to whatever form of perfection is possible for you. So next, Jennifer also touched on it, looking through all of your internal processes and supplies within your facility, whether it's food and water, medications. This is really just going through and methodically taking into consideration all of the little details of a successful center, all of the things that normally are part of your normal logistical processes of your day-to-day checks and your month-to-month checks that may have been not as high on your priority list as while we were providing CAS remote services for our centers. The priorities have just shifted, and now that we're shifting back, as we always say, back to our roots, going back to some of the more regular processes that the leadership team will be taking care of, and the back office will be vital to ensure that you're not scrambling at the end because you realize that you don't have aspirin, for example, that is not expired. So finally, just some of other things to consider are making plans for transportation. This is all just planning for regular processes that are necessary for your day-to-day operation. So this can vary from center to center. Everybody has different plans in place. So it really takes a matter of sitting down with your staff and recognizing what changes and what modifications you have to make. Next slide, please. So I just want to touch a little bit on the Model COVID-19 Prevention Program, which we spoke on in the last web talk. So Cal OSHA has this requirement to have a prevention program in place. And while this particular model plan that they've provided is an option for you to use, facilities are welcome to develop their own plan so long as they meet all of the requirements under the prevention program. This model plan is very easy to use and update and really cater to what your own facility's needs are, and it covers all of the requirements that the Cal OSHA prevention program has mandated for facilities. And so the vision team, in our view, this is a really great place to at least start and to modify to your center's own needs. And in addition to developing the program, providing training, again, another concept that's been reinforced over and over is to provide training and to be flexible, so that even if the training was developed with every consideration that you can possibly think of, things might change on a dime, and just to be ready for those changes as much as you can. But this prevention program does provide a framework in which the facility and the leadership can consider all of the safety efforts that need to be put into place as we go back to congregate services. So if there's anything that the vision team would like to add in terms of the administrative readiness of facilities. I know I breezed through that. I'm trying to get us back on schedule.
No, it's good.
Okay, next slide. And I'd like to pass it over to Jennifer, I believe, or Lois, excuse me.
Lois.
Yes.
Thank you, Kay. Good morning, everybody. This is Lois Sones, and I'm the program director at Elder Day Adult Day Healthcare in Santa Cruz. And since we are a little behind, I'll go a bit quickly through this, but you'll have the slides if you need them for reference. CL 2104, because that's going to tell us how we can actually get back to congregate services. But meanwhile, we decided here at our center that we really had to start preparing now, because we have, as I'm sure you all do, we have participants who are in incredible need for being back here at the center. And so we started out by thinking about the participants from the perspective of who needs to be here the most, who really has great need. As I'm sure you know, there's some people who have much more need and some people who have less need, although all of them need to be here. And so we tried to figure out how we could do that. And so we've started over the last month or so just asking people about their interest in coming back to the center, although most people, we hear it loudly about their interest in coming back. We're just trying to be clear about that, what people are wanting. And again, we're trying to make sure that we're really meeting people where they are, that we're not trying to force them, but we're trying to really understand what their needs are and trying to figure out what they need for returning to the center. And next slide, please. Next slide. If we could have the next one, be great. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead. So we were just talking about where to start with this and decided we needed some sort of structured approach that that we couldn't just sort of just pull out of the air who we needed to come back first. Although many of my team really said, this person needs to come back, that person needs to come back. So we decided that what we needed to do was come up with a way that we could really use our team's knowledge of our participants, because with the weekly contacts, people know pretty well what the participant needs are. So we decided that we would come up with a way to get sort of a snapshot of what our participants' needs were, and to just decide how to even begin to think about bringing people back. So if you'll go on to the next slide, please. So we created a tool. It wasn't exactly a tool when we started out, but we had two MDT meetings where we went through every participant and assigned them a number score in terms of acuity, which was just sort of feeling it out. It was just the nurse said one thing, the social worker said another, activity said another, and we came up with a medical acuity and a social. Evaluate first to come back to the center. And if you remember, Jill mentioned evaluation versus assessment. And I think that's a really important distinction, because the people who we're talking about evaluating now are people we're evaluating for coming back to in-center services. The assessment and reassessment is that formal process that we do every 6 months. And that's a separate sort of thing. But this is really an evaluation by the MDT to decide if people are ready to come back to the center. Could we move 2 slides ahead now, please? Yep, there we go. Great. So here's a form that we came up with actually after my team did our original triaging, and this, what we did is we took the some of the medical and physical factors from the risk factor on the IPC and some of the social emotional factors, and then some other things that were really relevant to our participants who are being served under TAS. And you'll see there, it's a lot of these risk factors are very familiar to you. And just for every check mark, you can give a point, and the higher the points are, the more acute are. So this is a sample. This is kind of what we did. It's not any official form, but it's just a structured way what your participants' needs are and who you need to start evaluating. If you can go to the next form, next page, please. I'll start to tell you what that is before the page comes. It's just, there you go. That's a sample of what we actually did at our center. We had the medical acuity, the social acuity, and then we came up with a total acuity score. And you can see, just looking down the list, like the first person on the list, we couldn't even guess what her needs were because she's been on hold. The family asked to be on hold. So we just said she needs an evaluation before we can even guess what her needs for coming back to the center are. If you look down toward the middle, there's a person with an acuity score of 10. That person is diabetic, not well controlled. He's having difficulty with mood swings, a lot of cognitive decline. He's aggressive, he's isolated, and his caregiver is going absolutely crazy. And so we said he's a 10, has the highest score, and he's somebody we need to evaluate early for coming back. And so that's just how we use this form. It's kind of a structured way of informally making an assessment. What we're doing now is we're taking everybody who came up with a score of 8, 9, or 10, and we're starting an evaluation on them. So the nurse is calling, setting up appointments for the people to come in individually. And social workers are talking to them individually, and we'll have the therapists evaluate them as well. So that's just where we're starting. And I think the rest of the team have some things they'd like to add about getting participants ready. Okay, Helen?
I just wanted to add really quickly, other than just looking at the risk factor alone, consider how well those risk factors are being managed under their current living environment, and especially the caregiver availability. And that's something we're really looking at right now, because the family members, caregivers are returning back to school or the work environment. And so we prioritize those with the most respite care need.
Yeah, I just echo all of that. And what I love about this approach is how person-centered it is. It really puts the participant at the core of it, at recognizing what their personal risk factors are, what their personal situation is with their families and caregivers and their chronic conditions. So it really helps to be methodical about being person-centered, because even though qualitatively, I think we all know our participants and we have a gut feeling about which participants we really need to come back to congregate settings as quickly as possible, and others who have good social support systems at home, they might benefit from taking a little bit of a longer time. So it really kind of helps to quantify that gut feeling, which I think is really helpful when we're trying to do everything in a stepwise fashion, so that all the participants are given the full evaluation that they need.
And just one more thing to add, this form is wonderful, Lois, and thank you for sharing. And this goes hand in hand with the transparency as a center you have with your participants about explaining to them the steps you have taken as a center, as a facility, to bring them back to the center. So there's that little aspect of it as well, right? Making sure that they feel comfortable coming back to the center. So sharing your vaccination rates, your vaccination efforts, the sanitation, the upgrades you've made to the facility, just giving that little peace of mind to the family members as well as the participants, so that when they are coming, they're not feeling anxious about possibly getting sick at the center.
Jennifer, was there anything you wanted to add here?
No, I think you all did a fabulous job in sharing your thoughts. I just would like to echo everything that you all said. Person-centered, yay.
Then just the one other thing I want to make sure to mention is that if you do use either this form or something like this, some sort of structured form for triaging and deciding who to evaluate, one of the things that we're certainly finding out is that when we formally evaluate somebody, sometimes we need to reassign the number for the risk and either raise or lower it in terms of priority for coming back to the center. So you may need, again, this is not something that is constant or rock solid. It's something that you may need to change after you get to know or actually have hands-on or eyes-on to see the participants and what their needs are. And now I think we're moving on to transportation, and I think Lydia is going to join us for that.
Yeah, just really quickly, we'll probably spend some time on transportation and another webinar, because a lot of questions have come in relative to this. So let me just say for now, we still have to follow the overall guidance until we get specific guidance from our California Department of Public Health for distancing, masking, and so on, even for people who are fully vaccinated. And that really also just protects you all from any liability concerns. So hang in there. We're all trying to get that guidance, and as soon as we get it, it will be distributed to you all. So really here, I just wanted to point out to you the guidance checklist that we developed based on some work that the state of Massachusetts had done. And there's also a Public Transportation Association transit guide that could help you evaluate how your public transit is doing relative to safety. So basically just wanted to alert you to those couple of resources, and we'll come back and revisit transportation, I know, in the future. Next slide.
Okay, so we've talked a lot this morning about the readiness phase, and we just wanted to give you a preview of what the set and go phases might look like. So when you get to set, or you ask yourself, are we set? Some of the things you might want to consider is, have you obtained your, next slide, please. Have you attained your approved CDA form that we talked about this morning? And have you checked off with your team everything that you wanted to do in the readiness stage? It's kind of an evaluation to say check, check, check. And then you want to kind of do what I would call a little test run to see that everything is in place as you have envisioned it should be in place before you really hit the go button. Next slide, please. And then finally go, yay, we're back. but it's very incremental. And when we get to go, you want to continue to reevaluate how things are going and stay on top of the latest information in terms of how the center needs to be structured for infectious control and safety. Because at this point, really safety is our most important concern for both our staff and our participants. So when we're in the go phase, we just want to really just keep going in terms of understanding the dynamics of the environment that we're working in. And we're going to talk more about set and go, I think, in future trainings. Next slide, please.
We're going to do one last poll, and we are going to go a few minutes over, everybody. I hope you can stay with us for the last few slides. But here we want to find out, based on what you've learned today about returning to congregate service, how would you describe your feeling of readiness? And I think we're going to just do this little poll every so often and check in with you all and see how you're feeling. So please go ahead and you can check multiple answers here. And I'd be surprised if anyone says that they are ready to go on all of these points. Okay. So facility and staff seem to be pretty ready, and about half of you are saying participants and caregivers are generally expressing a desire to get back to services. So that's good to hear. And you know, after people have been isolated for this long, I know I feel that way sometimes myself, just venturing out into the world feels a little fearful. So we can expect that of our participants. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close this poll and share with you the results. And like I said, we'll just check in with you all periodically on this and see how you're doing. Just gives us a little pulse taking opportunity. Next slide. So here's that CDC guidance, some ventilation tips, some transportation guidance that we've already mentioned. So these are here for your later perusal. Go ahead and next slide. And the Cal OSHA temporary standards that Kay talked about earlier for your reference again. Next slide. Upcoming talks, so we've highlighted the training that Jill and Denise mentioned earlier, April 14th, so please stay alert for that announcement. And Danielle, I'm sure from CATS, will get that out to everyone, so we'll see you all there. And then the next few trainings, if you could circle those dates on your calendar for your key staff and yourselves, we'll definitely be talking more about the ACL and more tips from our vision team and others for getting back to congregate services. I do want to thank all of our presenters today. You guys did a fantastic job. And I also want to express my thanks, as Denise did, to this vision team. They are a dedicated crew meeting for hours and hours every week, along with our CDA partners. And it's been a real joy and pleasure and privilege to work with all of you. So next slide. I was inspired by Jennifer to give you two thoughts of the week for the first time ever. And the first one is brought to you by Alan Lakin, a Harvard-trained time management author and trainer. And he says, planning is bringing the future into the present so that you can do something about it now. So that got me thinking about planning as a way to close your eyes and imagine and shape your future and begin to envision what that looks like in your own very unique ways. But that is the first step, right, to action is doing some planning. And the second one, by Leonard Bernstein, our American conductor, composer, humanitarian, amazing person. To achieve great things, two things are needed: a plan and not quite enough time. I think we can all agree that we've been operating under planning and implementation with not enough time, but great things are going to come out of that, everybody. And we do look forward to continuing this journey with all of you. We'll do it together. Remember, you're not striving for perfection, but we do want you to plan and execute your plans as best as you can toward a safe reunion with your participants and caregivers. So thank you for joining us today. Stay safe, be good to yourselves. We'll see you in 2 weeks, and we will definitely work on getting some FAQs out to everyone. Thank you for your questions and comments today, everyone, and we appreciate your joining us. Take care.